Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this rally push mower. It is powered by an older style 3.5 horse Briggs and Stratton engine and was given to the channel by Paul. Paul was at his son's house helping him clean out the barn. Paul's son was moving and he came across this machine. Now, neither Paul nor his son have ever heard this run. They actually know nothing about it because it was left by the prior owner. So it's been some time since this has run. Potentially it still runs and needs nothing, but I kind of doubt it. So, I say we just check the oil, make sure the blade is tight, we'll add a bit of fuel, and pull it over as is. See if it shows any signs of life. Yeah, it looks like we got plenty of oil. So actually, it's nice that they have a message here, thread in to check. That's one thing I kind of always second guess because on Hondas, you're not supposed to thread it in to check the oil level. And it kind of varies from machine to machine. So in this case, we do need to thread it in. Let's see what we have. And yeah, it's a little bit overfull. The oil is definitely past due for a change, but we're not going to change it yet. Let's hear the engine run first, make sure it's capable of running and that it's not knocking. Before I check the blade, I'm going to remove this connection to the plug. I'm going to be turning the blade by hand. I don't want there to be any chance of the mower starting. To check the blade, I usually flip the mower up on its side. And a good rule of thumb is to locate the carburetor and make sure you flip it in such a way that the carb is facing up. If the carb is facing down, then you're going to have a few problems. I think the biggest one is oil coming from the engine through the breather and down into the airbox and into the carburetor. In this case, we have this big chute right here. So if we flipped it so that the airbox and carb was up, it's going to be pretty unstable. So I'm thinking instead, the next best thing would be to flip it forward, and that should avoid any issues with the breather. Wow, that is pretty bad. So this is the cutting edge right here. Looks like we have a hole drilled, so I'm not sure if that's factory or not, but the back side of the blade is missing a lot. This little piece here is just holding on by that little bit. And the other side, it's in better shape. At least the back side's intact. We have that same drilled hole right there on the cutting edge. Of course, the blade's really dull. I'd say it needs to be sharpened, but really, it just needs to be replaced. So for now, let's just double check that it's tight. We're not obviously going to cut with it like this. But if the engine runs, or if we can get it to run and it sounds good, then we will buy a new blade. Let's just get this air filter off. There's a foam filter in here, and they usually turn to dust. So I don't want the engine running just to suck in an old piece of foam. So let's see if we can muscle this open. So there's the filter. It looks pretty good, actually. But yeah, actually the bottom's really bad. There's just nothing left. So we'll keep that off to the side. I think I got some dust in there, so I'm going to blow that out real quick. We'll add some fuel, and we'll see what we get. Thankfully, the choke was closed. Let's see what the tank looks like. These are usually the first to go on these machines. They rust out, and they're no longer available. But this one looks really good. So I would say there's a very good chance of this running. All right, let's get the plug wire back on the plug. The ignition's in the start position. The choke is already on. I think it's an auto choke. So what do you think? It's gonna run? Amazing. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. It's been probably decades since this mower has been run, and it started on the third pull. The engine sounded pretty good, although there was some smoke, and the engine came to life pretty slowly, but as that choke plate opened up, the engine speed did increase. That said, though, it still sounded slow. Even after moving it in the fast position, it didn't really change the speed that much. And then I brought it down to slow, and again, the speed remained about the same, although I did see the spring tension come off. So we might need to make some adjustments down here. The first one being the idle set screw. I can see actually it right there, and it's driven all the way in. So that's why in the idle position, the engine's not slowing down a whole lot. So let's back that out a bit. We'll try to restart it and see if the idle position actually idles the engine. Let's try that. I'll try to idle it down. I'd say that small change made a pretty big difference, because this time when I moved that throttle to the idle position, the engine speed came down to a nice idle. So, it sounded like we were pretty close, both on the high and the low speed. I was half tempted to put a tachometer on and try to fine tune it, but this machine was vibrating quite a bit. And given the condition of this blade, I really didn't want to approach it too close with the engine running. So I think I'm going to fine tune it once we get a new blade on, but based on what I've seen, there's no reason why we shouldn't get that blade ordered up. So I'm going to order a blade. For now, I'm going to get this up on the lift. We'll get that oil changed. It's definitely past due, and I would say has earned it already. Actually, quick change of plan. Before I get this up on the lift for the oil change, I want to get this blade pulled right now. I did a quick search online for a replacement blade and came up completely empty. So I'm thinking it might be a challenge to find a blade to fit this mower. So if I get the blade off, I can take some detailed measurements and potentially find an alternative. I believe this mower takes 560 milliliters of oil, which is just over half a quart. So I've got that all measured out. So we'll just pour it in and double check. Yeah, it's a touch over full. So I'm going to suck a little bit out. We'll double check. Yeah, I think we're there. It's pretty much perfect. So it is the next day. I took some measurements before going to bed, and I went online and did a search for a replacement blade and did come up with something that I think will work. As far as I can tell, the blade adapter is a perfect match on the replacement blade, but there are a couple differences. The new blade, it's about a 1/4 inch longer and a 1/4 inch more narrow. That said, though, I think it'll fit in there just fine. So it was only $12. That's been ordered up. It'll be here in about a week. So while we wait for that, I do want to clean this machine up. And although the carb is running the engine well, I actually ordered a rebuild kit and an air filter before I ever turned the camera on, assuming that I was going to need both. And of course, as it turns out, we need the air filter, but the carb kit, it's debatable. It is running the engine, so technically we don't have to rebuild the carb, but I'm sure that diaphragm is not in very good shape. It is quite old, and the first time we started it, the choke was really slow to turn off, and that's driven by the diaphragm, so potentially it's just petrified, or maybe things were just a little bit stiff from not being used in a while. So either way, we should clean it up. We should put the new kit in there. And while we're at it, we'll get the tank off and just rinse out some of the junk in the bottom of that tank. The carburetor and the tank, they come off as one unit. They're held on just by 2 bolts. We've got one right there, and there's supposed to be another one right there, but that one is missing. So either it fell out or potentially broke off. So once we remove this bolt, we should be able to slide the carburetor right out. But even before doing that, let's disconnect the throttle cable, and then we should be good to go. All right, I just put a mark there on the throttle cable because this is actually how you adjust the top speed. And we want to set it roughly where it is. We're going to have to fine-tune that anyway, once we get the blade replaced. So we'll just loosen this bracket and kind of fold it out of the way. And we should be able to lift this up and disconnect it from the machine. So the carb should just pull off the intake boot. And I say should, it's kind of petrified on there, and there's a lot of dirt, so there might actually be a clamp on there, but I'm not seeing it. Yeah, I think it's coming off, but that intake pipe, it's moving around quite a bit, so I'm not sure if that's normal. So I might pull the blower housing off and just take a peek, make sure we don't have a problem. And it's probably a good idea to do that anyway, just to make sure we don't have a critter nest. I think we're okay. This tube just runs over to here, and likely there's just another O-ring in there, and I think a bit of play is likely normal, so I don't think we have to do anything there. Anyway, now that we're in, it's kind of interesting the setup here. You know, we have an air vane governor for controlling the engine speed, and we have a band brake on the flywheel. So I don't know if you noticed, but when I shut this machine down, it stops instantly, you know, quite a bit better than newer machines. And that's because newer machines don't have anything as capable of this. So this is actually a really nice feature. Anyway, before getting the blower housing back on, you know, I think we should blow this out. There is some debris in there. And this piece right here has a hole on top. You know, that is for thin oil. This actually needs to stay stationary when the engine's running, but the crankshaft extends through it. So it needs a little bit of lubrication, otherwise there's going to be too much friction, and this piece could start to spin, which would damage the starter recoil. So let's get those things taken care of and get the blower housing back on. I was just cleaning up the blower housing, getting it ready to reinstall, and came across the engine model and type. And what I'm most interested in actually is the date code here on the right. It says 900321. So this machine actually was made in March 21st of 1990, which is kind of surprising. You know, I just assumed this was a 1970s or 80s model. You know, instead, we're just a few months into 1990. All right, let's try to get this open. Looks like there's 3 bolts right here, a 4th, I think, under there, and under that dirt right there is a 5th bolt. So I think I'm going to try the impact, kind of on the medium setting. These bolts, I'd say, have been in here for quite a while. That one's loose. So's that one. I can't get that lucky. So the carburetor is kind of stuck to the gasket. So I'm going to try to shock it off or potentially pry it off. There we go. We'll try to get some of this dirt off. And I almost forgot, before we get this off, there is some linkage that runs up to the choke. So we need to remove this bolt, detach the linkage, and then the carb should lift out of place. All right, so I'm going to set that off to the side for now, as well as the diaphragm. So this diaphragm, it's not torn, but it is pretty crunchy. And this is the mechanism here that controls the choke. So normally the spring is pushing this rod up, at least when the engine's off. That closes the choke. And once the engine starts, it pulls a vacuum underneath, and that pulls this rod down, opening up the choke. So that's how that works. And likely, it was really slow to turn off the first time we started it. So, I'm thinking this diaphragm was just really crunchy and not working like it should. I'm a little bit surprised at what I see on this carburetor. I was expecting it to look a little bit different on the inside and was expecting a carb made out of metal. For something so old, I would have expected that. Instead, we have a carb that is plastic. Anyway, this is the pickup tube right here. We have a screen. Those look to be in good shape. This right here is what connects to the breather. And it looks like we have a spring right there. So that spring is what keeps that choke closed until that rod is able to overpower it and open it. This here connects to the engine. We do have a rubber O-ring. I believe the rebuild kit has one of those in it. And we also have an adjustable needle. So let's turn that in and just note where it's at. So there's half, 1, almost 1.5. So we'll set that aside. There is a washer in there and likely an O-ring, so we'll get those out. And we'll set those aside. We also have this piece right here. There's just a piece of rubber, which actually just broke, which is okay. We have a new one of those. And we also have the O-ring in here, so we'll pick that out. The kit should also have a new one. I think that's it. There's not really much to this carb, so I'm going to spray down the outside with some carb cleaner. We'll soak this in the ultrasonic for a bit, and then we'll get it back together. And I'm thinking I might do the same for this tank. There is still fuel in here, so I'll drain that out. And I think this will actually fit in the ultrasonic, so we'll let that soak as well. That should take care of a lot of this grime on the outside, as well as some of the junk that's inside. Carb cleaned up pretty well, maybe a little bit too well, because it took most of the paint off. So now we know it's plastic. There's no hiding it. The fuel tank, I did drain a fuel, and I'm thinking we'll give this a quick soak as well. Then we'll just have to dry it off really good before putting it all back together. Carb cleaned up really well, and so did the tank. It is spotless both on the inside and the out. So we are ready to put this back together. And actually, I did spend a second just kind of studying this carb. I haven't worked on one like this, and I'm going to say this is probably the most simple carb I have ever worked on. You know, I was expecting to see a pump diaphragm, and instead, I don't see any check valves. So that got me wondering, you know, is this a bowl for fuel? On a lot of these Briggs, they have a bowl with an overflow that returns the excess, but without a pump, there's no bowl. And this is actually for the spring, for the auto choke. So this has nothing to do with fuel delivery. You know, I think this just pulls fuel directly from the tank, passes through the needle, and goes right into the carb. I don't think there's anything more to this fuel system than that needle and the pickup tube. So pretty simple setup. And as far as this spring goes, I was wrong about its purpose. You know, it does hold the choke closed, but as the ultrasonic heated that spring, it is a bimetallic spring, and it actually opened that choke right up. So there's actually two mechanisms to open the choke. One is heat. The breather is connected here, so the hot air from the engine passes through here to warm that up, which will eventually hold that choke open. And the second mechanism is right here, which is part of the diaphragm. You know, as soon as the engine starts, this lever should get pulled down, and we didn't see that the first time we started, so this was not working correctly. But I think the bimetallic strip was, because the second time we started it, you know, that choke was already in the off position. Anyway, I think we should get this back together. I've set all the used parts off to the side. We will use the new ones where possible. And yeah, I'm thinking this part actually don't know where it goes on this application. So yeah, it looks like we do have some extra parts, but that's okay. We'll use the ones that apply and set the rest aside. Yeah, so we'll start with the needle here. It looks like there is a plastic insert that can be replaced. So I'm going to thread this needle in. We'll just pull. That part comes out. So we'll set that aside and just insert the new one. And actually there's an O-ring down there, so let's pull that out. All right, we'll set that aside, put the new O-ring in, put the new plastic insert in. Just going to use a socket to push this in. It should, I think, lock in place. Right now it's kind of loose. Yeah, it's not in there very well. So let's try putting the O-ring on that piece first, and then pushing it in place. Okay, there we go. And let's see, we need this O-ring right here. And then the washer, which I think goes something like that. So we'll turn this in, lightly bottom it out, and then I'm going to back it out a turn and a half. All right, so we're bottomed out. There's half, 1.5 turns. As far as I can tell, this jet and that needle, they're not used in this application, so we'll set that aside. We do need this O-ring for the intake manifold, so we'll get that in place. Like that. Yeah, that's for the air filter. We'll hold off on that. This piece, don't think we use on this carburetor. I don't see that we took a piece off like that, nor that. This here is going to go for the auto choke. And lastly, we have the spring and the new diaphragm. So we'll get that out carefully. And you can see this new diaphragm, very flexible, where the old one was not. So I've got this spring locked in place. So now we just need to position it roughly where it needs to go. And then we'll put the carb in place, making sure that this passes through right there. Line up those holes and bolt it down. I can see why all these bolts were pretty loose. You know, it's just a plastic carb, no metal bushings. So really all you can do is snug it up. You don't want to use excessive force. You are going to crack the carb body. before I fully tighten that bolt. I did find a screw of the right thread. I think it's too long, but I want to use it to at least align the orientation so I can tighten that up and know that it's in the right position. And likely we're going to have to circle back on this one because that's as far as I can go before it hits the carb body. All right, we'll set this back roughly to how it was. You can actually see the clean spot on the cable, so we should get it pretty close, and then we'll fine-tune it later with the tachometer. Because theoretically, we could get a little bit more out of this if we need to, as far as engine speed. All right, so we'll get the new gasket on for the air filter, hopefully without ripping it. It's a tight fit. And one thing to note, you do need to oil the filter. This is a foam filter. According to this, every 25 hours you should re-oil it, and even more often under dusty conditions. So we'll get the new filter on. You know, sometimes they come pre-oiled, although this one looks dry. The new blade showed up today, and I think it's going to work out. The length is actually an exact match. The blade adapter looks a little different as far as these hole sizes go, so I'm a little concerned about that. And of course, the total width is 1/4 inch less than the original. I did double check this. It's perfectly balanced, so we don't need to do anything there. And quite an improvement over this one. You know, this one just drops right to the side. So yeah, the whole blade, besides being dangerous, is way out of balance. Anyway, let's flip this back up. We'll clean the deck real quick and get the new blade mounted. Gonna spray on some fluid film. That'll help protect the metal. And it's also gonna help kind of shed the grass so it doesn't stick quite as easily to the bottom of the deck. All right, let's give this a try. We're all fueled up and ready to go. Hopefully it runs as good as it did before I cleaned the carb, because it was running pretty well. Likely we will have to tweak that needle a bit, but let's pull it a few times and see what we get. All right, 3 pulls. Let's try it again. Yeah, the engine speed, it's a little bit off. So the high speed is a little bit too slow and the idle is way too slow. So I'm gonna bring in the idle adjustment a bit and also add a little bit more length to that cable. Actually, before I do that, let's get it started again. I want to adjust that needle. The low speed shouldn't have changed. The only thing that's changed is that I cleaned the carb and that needle is a little bit further out than it used to be. So we'll get it started again. I'm gonna have to tie off the bail so the engine keeps running, and then we'll adjust this jet. I'm gonna find where the engine runs the fastest, and then I'm gonna open it up just a little bit more so that we don't overheat the engine. Well, I think we're pretty much there. You know, the idle is pretty good. We were around 1800 RPM, so I brought it up a little bit to about 2100 RPM. And at full throttle, we're maxing out at about 3000 RPM, which for a 20-inch blade, that's a little bit slow. You know, we can increase that speed to at least 3200 RPM. So originally, I was thinking I'd just crack that loose, pull this outer sleeve back a little bit, and that would give me a little bit more travel to increase the spring tension, but we're already maxed out on this mechanism, so making an adjustment there isn't going to do anything. You know, I think what we need to do is actually bend this piece right here to increase the spring tension at full throttle. The only issue with that is this cable is kind of in the way, so I'm going to try moving it down here, and if that works out, we'll restart it, increase the speed closer to 3200 RPM. And then at that point, I think we're going to be ready to get this thing outside. I think that'll do it. So I'm going to get the engine restarted. We'll bend this tab back a little bit and see if we can't get some more speed. This one's being a little bit stubborn. It seems like no matter what adjustment I made, the engine speed would just come right back down to 3000 RPM. And I think that's largely due to the fact that we have a pretty long governor spring. And the adjustments I'm making down here are pretty fine adjustments, so I don't think it's really influencing too much the spring tension that we're applying to the engine. So I think we're going to have to call 3000 RPM good enough, and maybe that's what it's supposed to be. Anyway, we're not quite ready to get this thing outside. I forgot I do need to get the proper length screw, so I'm going to make a trip to the hardware store. But more importantly, the gas cap, it is leaking a bit, so I'm going to see if I can source a new one of those. So I'm going to pause it here. We'll try to gather the last two parts, and then we'll get this thing outside and put it to work. Well, I wouldn't say it started on the first pull, but it did start. It ran quite well and had no issues cutting the lawn. So, yeah, for an old machine, a simple one at that, it is performing quite well. I did get also a used cap to replace this one that I thought was leaking, but I don't think it is. You can see it still looks wet right there, and actually, if that was fuel, it would have evaporated right away. So I'm thinking it was just oil. That said, though, this cap I think matches a little bit better than the red one, and the red one has a little bit more rust on it. So we'll put the chrome one in its place. And I did also order the needed bolt. Hasn't shown up yet, so that'll be something for a later day. But for now, I think we're done. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching. All right, a little bit of bonus footage here. Someone is on their way to pick up this mower right now. And the bolt finally arrived. I guess I could have gone to the hardware store. It probably would have been cheaper and faster. But for some reason, I ordered the OEM part. So let's get that installed. Now I'm done.